What we know right now. We know that he had a lot of firepower. We know he had a long rifle, AR style weapon, and we know he came with a lot of ammunition. And really, he was, if it wasn't for the police there, this could have been much, much worse. This guy came there prepared to take out a lot of people, and police have made that very clear that had they not stopped him in that 1 minute that they arrived on scene, this could have been far worse.
We know, for example, like from the Pulse nightclub shooting, that was clearly somebody targeting gay men.
That's right.
Right. That was a gay nightclub in Florida in 2016. Do we know anything about the places that he was targeting here, the kinds of bars and nightclubs?
No, so this area has a lot of restaurants, has a lot of bars, thousands of people were there, the officials there said. So there's no indication as to why he was targeting this specific area. It is interesting though, he didn't enter the bar, he did this outside. So was this just an opportunity? He saw some people gathered outside and then he just chose this as an area, or did he research this? Is there more to this than we really know right now? And hopefully, you know, when authorities give us the next update, we'll know. But it's a problem, and they're going to need to look at this in terms of whether or not, definitely whether or not this is some kind of a copycat, whether or not the shooting in El Paso triggered this, because it happened with hours after the El Paso shooting. That's something that law enforcement is definitely going to be concerned about.
I want to bring in Juliet Cayenne. Juliet, police are investigating this document filled with white supremacist, racist hatred towards immigrants and Latinos. They believe it was written by the alleged terrorist in El Paso, Texas. You have talked, and I've heard you speak very articulately about what's called stochastic, I believe that's the term, stochastic terrorism.
Yes.
Why don't you explain to people what that is and why that might be relevant here?
So stochastic terrorism is just a way of describing an atmosphere that's created in, say, a community or a nation like ours. And it's the use of mass media, social network platforms, or whatever else to amplify hatred and the targeting of specific individuals, Mexicans, African Americans, LGBTQ community. That language incites violence, which is utterly predictable. In other words, yes, people are going to get radicalized, but the specific incident, who does it, where, how, is actually unpredictable. And so it's a way of describing an atmosphere of radicalization as compared to, say, you know, the world I come from, counterterrorism, you know, jihadism, right, where it was very specific, focused training was involved. This is a different way of describing it. So what we're seeing, because I read the manifesto, is a form of white supremacy that is what we call either replacement or displacement theory. The sense that the existence of the other, in this case Hispanics, is a zero-sum game. Their existence makes my existence as a white male, in the case of this killer, makes it impossible. So they actually view it as an enemy. That is overlaid by a public atmosphere created by the president, I'll say it now, and others that sort of wink and nod, give a safe haven for this kind of ideology. They don't condemn it. They actually, you know, they basically, it's not shamed. That's the word I've been using the last 24 hours. It's not shamed, and we need to shame it publicly from the White House on down.
But to hold that thought, I'm going to come back to you, but right now the mayor of Dayton, Nan Whaley, is holding another news conference on the shooting. Let's listen in.
Body armor and used an AK-like gun, assault rifle, .223 caliber with high-capacity magazines, and he had additional magazines with him as well. We had 10 fatalities, including the shooter. That number is still the same from this morning. We have had, the hospitals have had 27 people treated and 15 discharged as of 10 o'clock this morning. In less than 1 minute, Dayton first responders neutralized the shooter. I'm just still completely amazed at the heroic nature of our police department, where they did a first aid, stopped a shooter with under a minute, and so we're grateful for their service. If you are a family or friend of a victim and have questions, you can call 937-333-8430 or come to the convention center. And if you have any information on the incident, as this incident is ongoing, please call 937-225-6217. We are grateful for all of the supporters and folks helping us from the American Red Cross, GADAHA, the FBI, ATF, etc. The community blood bank is supporting the hospitals, and we are working with them to set up a blood donation opportunities. We will have more information about that in the coming hours. At 8 p.m. tonight, the community will hold a vigil for the families and those that have lost their life. We'll have a location for you again in the coming hours. The Oregon District will be open coming this afternoon in the early afternoon. Okay. I'm going to let some folks speak and then we'll do questions. First, I'd like to have Dr. Seaman come forward and make a few remarks.
Thank you, Mayor Whaley. Again, I'm Dr. Greg Seaman. I'm a trauma surgeon at Miami Valley Hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center for the greater Dayton region. Our facility activated our mass casualty incident plan around 1:30 a.m. this morning in association with the mass casualty incident here in downtown Dayton. That mobilized our entire team. Our facility received a total of 16 patients, of which 12 have already been treated and released. We do have a total of 4 patients that are currently admitted, and 1 remains in critical condition. Some of those patients...
This is absolutely sickening. It sickens me to see this occurring again and again and again here in America, and to think that at least probably 30, 35, 40 years ago, you could literally drive onto a school property with a high-powered rifle or a shotgun, knowing that whenever you got through doing what you was doing at school, that you was going to leave that afternoon and either go bird hunting, squirrel hunting, or some sort of atmosphere pertaining to wildlife, and everybody kept their distance and everybody knowed how to respect each other's dignity in regard of not doing stuff like this. We have phased off into a very, very gruesome, dark time of American history. And I can't even remember whenever even the Native Americans or the Spanish would conduct themselves in such of a way under the pretense of just wanting to bring harm and hurt into people's lives. Usually whenever a bear attacks or a lion attacks, usually they feel threatened or they got some sort of grudge because they feel like that they've been wronged. But to see these acts continually set out towards wanting to display all this pain and anguish is absolutely senseless, to say the least. It's horrible. It's horrifying.
have undergone or will undergo surgery later today.
Meeting opportunity, and we need to do more to examine what is causing that here on our shores, because this is the 21st century national security threat most immediately upon us, and a 17th century solution to national security like building walls is completely irrelevant to this problem.
And let's talk about the issue of social media connectivity, because you've always had radical people, they've always been around. Now they have a very direct way of being able to talk to each other, even if chased off things like Twitter, chased off sort of traditional social media. You have then secondary social media, things like 8chan, the way that this
It may be, but I don't see nobody with a magic wand towards waving a wand and curing the problem pertaining to all the illegal immigrants that's trying to force their way into the American land of the free. Putting up fences and gates, walls. It may be an old method, but it's working as long as we can continue to keep putting the walls up and keep putting the gates up, keep making it harder for other people just to walk in and take over.
Reid allegedly was,
And that
Gets and blocks the source of inflammation that contributes to.
I thought the critics zeroed in on the issues of choice, private health care, and cost.
Yeah, I did too.
begin to talk about radicalization in these terms as stochastic terrorism. And the point I was making before the press conference is that means that there's a responsibility at the top with President Trump, the White House, and leadership, which is to not give a safe haven or to amplify this hatred because the listener is likely to become radicalized. I'm not going to blame Donald Trump for this specific event. What I will blame the White House and Donald Trump for is not shaming the white nationalism. Look, the ideologies don't die. Bad ideologies don't die. Nazism didn't die with World War II. Nazis still exist. They became shamed, right? You couldn't get a job. You couldn't go to, you couldn't go out in the world as a Nazi, right? And you minimize the ideology. You shame it in civil society. Mm-hmm. The president is not shaming it. So I use that term shaming about what the president's responsibility is. It's not both sidesism. It isn't a wink and a nod. You need to shame this stuff and isolate it and make these people feel like they're not part of a greater movement that is condoned by the White House.
All right, Julia Kayama, I appreciate it.
I agree with that 100% whenever it comes to ridiculing something or bashing it or speaking up against it. But I do want to speak in behalf of, or not in behalf, but in the regard of Nazism. Nazism was actually supposed to have been a religion. It was supposed to have taken over the Christianity movement that began back during the days of Rome, whenever Martin Luther broke away from Catholicism. If you really study Nazism, they was bringing people over here in the late 20s and throughout the 30s, trying to conform people in thinking that Nazism was right. Nazism sympathizers, and there was groups of people that dedicated themselves in white supremacy towards saying that it was right, but it was also groups of people during that time that was standing up and saying that it was wrong. The same way as what's going on here in bringing all this violence into people's lives. It's wrong. It's no ifs, ands, buts about it. It's an intolerable situation that goes beyond a civilization to the point of barbaricnism of a group of people that even goes beyond a lion or a tiger or the Native American Indians, because ordinarily if you didn't mess with them, they didn't mess with you. But now if you ever mess with them, if you mess with their family, if you mess with their crops, if you mess with them, then you had trouble to pay. I brought this up with Secret Service this morning early, that even during the Valentine's murders up in Chicago, during Al Capone days, that was based around territorial harm that was being done to various groups pertaining to monetary losses or monetary gains. So there was some sort of a motive, though I didn't agree with their motive, and never will, compared to what people are doing today towards wanting to just bring harm and hurt into people's lives. It's senseless. And to me, this verifies all along towards what I've been talking about, of the fact that the Bible says that in the last days perilous times will come, but it also verifies the fact that in the last days Satan will rise up in great wrath because he realizes that his time is short. Satan has a pre-selected destiny that has been already written and chiseled in stone towards his Achilles heel. that God, the Creator, has placed upon to his being, his existence. And because he knows that he has failed, he is rising up and bringing more pain and anguish and harm and hurt into innocent people's lives, not just here in America, but all over the world. It is so, so grossly sad.
Phil Mudd, you're a former senior official with the FBI. Tell us what you think is going on right now in the investigation in El Paso.
There's a couple of pieces. You got to look back, you got to look forward. The looking forward piece would be the first thing I'd be thinking. We've been talking about copycats. There'd be people on the radar who have some psychological issues that will be followed in every place from New York to Los Angeles to El Paso. You've got to ensure that somebody doesn't look at this event who's already on the radar, or who a family sees, for example, that has issues, and says, if that person can do it, I should have the courage to go out and act on my anger myself. So there's, in addition to the stuff Americans ask about when they're watching us, what was the motive looking back, you got to be careful that nobody gets motivated to go forward and do the same thing. In the looking back piece, one quick comment. This is an area where the media will outpace the people who are experts for one simple reason. We have a motivation, it looks like, in El Paso. That's a document. But we don't know answers to questions I would have if I were back in the business. Was this individual having family issues? Did he break up with his girlfriend yesterday? Did he get fired yesterday? Are there other contradictory items on his computer that suggest a competing ideology? This quickly in, I can draw a conclusion that the document we saw in El Paso is probably the motivation, but I'm not 100% yet.
And as you noted, Shimon, one of the things that the police and the FBI in Dayton are looking for is this a copycat, as you talked about, somebody looking forward?
Yeah, and the other concern now, the FBI, we've heard the concern from the FBI director. Local law enforcement is very concerned about this, so they have to start going through 8chan, these other platforms where this stuff is living, where people are reading and consuming and perhaps maybe getting radicalized by consuming all of this. There is a lot of concern that if the FBI doesn't step in and start doing more, then the local law enforcement is going to have to do more on this issue, because there is a lot of concern now across big police departments in this entire country that this is going to continue to happen. Is there something they can do to prevent this?
My next guest has made trying to stop or at least curtail gun violence a central part of his 2020 presidential campaign. He's calling for a federal gun licensing system and a ban on what are called assault weapons. Joining me now, New Jersey Democratic Senator Cory Booker. Senator Booker, I'd say good morning, but it's not a good morning. 2 shootings in less than 13 hours, 29 people killed, 42 people injured or wounded. What was your reaction when you heard about the El Paso shooting and then you wake up and hear about Dayton?
First of all, the horror of it. Having been the mayor of a big city, you know the horrors of mass shootings and what it does. And so first and foremost, obviously, your thoughts and prayers are with all of the victims, the families who've lost people, the people who now have months, years of recovery. But you also know that thoughts and prayers are not enough. And I turn my attention to the person who is leading this country, who is, in my opinion, in this moral moment, who is failing. And I think that at the end of the day, especially because this was a white supremacist manifesto, that I want to say with more moral clarity that Donald Trump is responsible for this. He's responsible because he is stoking fears and hatred and bigotry. He is responsible because he's failing to condemn white supremacy and see it as it is, which is responsible for such a significant amount of the terrorist attacks. He's responsible because he is president of the United States and has failed to do anything significant to stop the mass availability of weapons to people who intend to do harm. And lastly, he's responsible because leaders take responsibility. We are responsible for each other in this culture, in this society, and our president, in the highest moral position in the land, should be taking responsibility in this painful, difficult moment and coming forward and telling us what he will do to address hate, to address white supremacy, to address the availability of guns, to address this mass violence. His talking about the cowardice of others is more of a reflection of his failure to take responsibility and cowardice in a time that we need courageous leadership.
Now, the screed, the document that the law enforcement is currently looking into about whether or not this terrorist, this white supremacist in El Paso wrote it, he uses the language that we've heard from the president in terms of calling migrants coming into this country an invasion. It's in the second sentence of this manifesto or screed, which is obviously something that President Trump has said. But the shooter also said that he thought this way and had these beliefs before President Trump, and that President Trump is not responsible. I don't know how you make sense of any of this, but what did you think when you saw that?
Well, a mass murderer who's trafficking in hatred and bigotry, literally trying to give some kind of exculpatory reaction to the president. I mean, come on. Our president right now is using the same language of racism, of bigotry, and white supremacy. The way this president is talking about immigrants, the way he's talking about minorities in this country, these are the words that are used by the kind of folks that are in the darkest corners of the internet, and as we see in this terrorist attack, the kind of people that ultimately manifest that hatred and violence. And for him not to take responsibility for that is a moral failing. And for him not to understand his failure to condemn it or see the seriousness, the majority of terrorist attacks since 9/11 have been right-wing extremists. The majority of those have been white supremacists. And we have a president that not only is failing to call out white supremacy, who in Charlottesville tried to create a savagely false equivalency, but he himself is using the language of hate on a regular basis to talk about Congress people, to condemn urban places, to talk about immigrants. He is responsible in his language, and he is fueling and giving license to this kind of hate in our country.
There's this theory, I think it's called stochastic terrorism, which is the idea of a leader using the mass media to demonize a particular group, whether it's Jews or immigrants or whomever. And then what appears to be lone wolf, individual psychotics attacking that one group, where the individual attack is not predictable, but the general trend of it is predictable because of the amplification of the bigotry. And it sounds like you are saying, you're not using the clinical term of stochastic terrorism, but it sounds like you are in a way holding President Trump responsible for some of these individual acts, whether it's the Tree of Life synagogue shooting or El Paso.
Jake, I just want to continue to speak in this time with moral clarity. We are a nation where we, as the poet says, we are each other's bond, we are each other's magnitude, we belong to each other. And we have a president of the United States who is savagely fraying the bonds of our nation by speaking consistently words of hatred, words of division, words of demonization and demagoguery. He is fueling a climate that is tearing at the fabric and fueling an environment where white supremacists and people who have ill will are finding more and more license to strike out against the vulnerable, to strike out against the immigrant, to strike out against, quote unquote, the other. This is a moral moment in our country, and our president is failing in his moral role to unite this nation, to heal, to bring about the best of humanity in America. And so he is responsible for what is going on and is doing nothing to stop the carnage and the chaos. Nothing in terms of gun legislation, nothing in terms of taking steps against white supremacy that we should take, nothing in terms of the kind of rhetoric that elevates, that brings together, that bonds. Instead, he is ripping at our nation. He is tearing people down. He is tearing us apart. This is a moral moment, and he is failing this nation. And what we saw in this last 24 hours, he must be held responsible.
Let's talk.
I think what he's trying to say here is that the president is exacerbating the problem. And in ways I can see what he's talking about because of the president's stance. And it's not so much what he says, but how that he says it, that is ringing a tone all over America in regard to what this man right here is talking about. When it comes to the safety and the well-being of the American people, we must realize that our number one goal has always been not prosperity, but safety. Prosperity comes after safety, and we must confine ourselves in these goals of practices towards the safety and the well-being of the citizens of this country, because if we don't, then we dissolve and we disintegrate as a great nation. Maybe Donald Trump, if anybody has ever thought this through, is purposely doing this so that he will declare martial law, so that things will be handled on more of a demagoguery type way. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in Donald Trump's mind. I don't know what's going on in Donald Trump's head. I just know this, that instead of the events pertaining to mass casualties getting better, they're getting worse. They're saying that it's been now over 250 mass casualties this year, of an excessive amount of over 3 times the amount of people that died during 9/11. We got a problem here in America. I think Donald Trump could possibly be part of that problem, but the biggest problem is the spiritual problem pertaining to the spiritual morals that has been torn from the very fabric of the church society here in the USA, to the point that now everybody thinks that the Joel Osteen message is the message that everybody is to adhere to. We have done this to ourselves by compromising. What did the Lord Jesus Christ say about salt? He said that salt has lost its Savior. What good is it other than to be trampled under the foot of man? You gotta have a strong spiritual background, a strong spiritual spine, if you're going to conquer over evil. You can't compromise with evil. You can't back up with evil.
About the bold, ambitious, overreaching, depending on one's point of view, I suppose, gun control plan that you have said you would pursue as president. As you know, the Senate has been reluctant to take up any gun legislation in the wake of mass shootings, including after 20 little children were killed at Sandy Hook, whether it's universal background checks or red flag laws. What are you proposing that you think you could actually get through the Senate? And I'm sorry to put it, because you're talking about morality, and I totally appreciate that on a morning like this. But there also is there's morality, and then there's what can get through the Senate.
Well, again, remember Strom Thurmond, longest filibuster in Senate history, was to try to stop civil rights legislation. But we were this nation that when people died, whether it was a shirtwaist factory fire, we changed laws in the Senate in response to women throwing themselves out windows, dying to their death in those sweatshops. We were a nation that overcame filibusters in the Senate when 4 girls were killed in a bombing. We responded. And so now here we are in a moral moment again. And it's not for girls or the horrific deaths of women. This is mass shooting after mass shooting. Before we can even bury our dead, another one happens. And so you want to know about a president that will take responsibility? Don't tell me what can't get done. The Senate is replete with a history of things that could not pass, but then did. What we need is a leader who is going to have a bold and ambitious plan. And let me tell you, I make no bones about it. I challenge everyone in the Democratic primary race to join me on common sense things like gun licensing. If in this country you need a license to drive a car, you should need a license to buy and possess a firearm. States that have done that have seen dramatic drops in shootings. And the problem is right now, as we saw recently in Gilroy, and Gavin Newsom spoke to this, the governor of California, that we now have a reality where, because the laws are actually getting strict in some states, the way these mass shooters get their weapons, that go to the neighboring state with less laws. We need to stop this patchwork of laws in our country that endangers people everywhere. We need to have a federal policy of gun licensing, of one handgun a month, of the kind of things I put out in my plan that are evidence-based, that will drive down shootings, will end this nightmare of the kind of carnage we're seeing. And I challenge every Democrat to stand up in this moral moment and say that I will do what is necessary to protect folks. And by the way, how will I get that done? The same way we've gotten big things done all the time is having leaders, number one, who are willing to stand up and put forth a bold vision, a dream, where this country should go, and then muster the moral majorities, muster the majorities in Congress to get it done. That's the kind of leader I'll be.
Last question, sir, and that is, the mass shootings shock us and they horrify us. 20 people killed in El Paso, 9 people killed in Dayton. But as you know better than I, being the mayor of Newark, most gun deaths are not from mass shootings. Most gun deaths are not from semi-automatic weapons. Most gun deaths, in terms of homicides, are from handguns, and they're individuals like the people that you invoke, the victims on the street in Newark. How would your gun legislation prevent those, the ones that don't get the media attention because they're one-offs, they're incidents that take place in the inner city, and frankly, because they're individual and because it takes place in high crime areas, the media doesn't pay as much attention to it?
Well, Jake, that's why this is such a personal issue for me, and this is why I feel so driven. Because when mass shooting to mass shooting, as frequent as they're getting, where we barely even have a time to digest one in our gut, we see another one happen. But the reality is, in communities like mine, you see these happening with chilling frequency every day in America. 100 people dying due to gun violence. And for me, having seen a teenager bleed out, trying vainly to stop them from bleeding, seeing shrines on street corners with teddy bears and candles to children killed, going to the perversion of a funeral where parents are burying their children. This is what drives me on this issue, and why I'm going to use every moment of this presidential campaign, and God willing in my presidency, to drive this point home. We need full measures, full-throated commitment to deal with this uniquely American problem. What Americans need to know is this does not happen in any way in other countries, unless they're in war. That we've had more people die in this nation in the last 50 years due to this gun violence crisis than all of our wars combined, from the Revolutionary War to the wars in the Middle East. This is a uniquely American problem, but I believe we can solve it with that unique American spirit that just says enough. We are going to do the things we know that can protect our families and our community.
It's a plague. It's a plague. It's the same thing if you had a disease that come up onto the land. The bubonic plague, the black plague. It's a plague. We are now dealing with a plague, a problem that compasses anything that we have ever even thought about in the regard of it being a disease. Now, the psychiatric community can call it a psychiatric problem. The political family can call it a moral problem. But the spiritual people who are spiritual knows what kind of problem that it is, and knows what's generating it, which is the Antichrist anti-evangelical beings that has fallen from heaven, that is now lurking through various people's lives that are bringing this type of hardship upon to the American land. It's a plague.
In our houses of worship, in our concerts, in our malls. We have to stop this before it visits upon your community. This is a time for moral courage. It is a time for more courageous empathy.
Yeah, it's almost like the Walmart slogan, coming near a neighborhood near you.
We need leaders that take responsibility.
All right, Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, thanks for joining us on this tough day. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
I was on the road yesterday almost all day, and I didn't get to come in until fairly late. I think it was around 11 o'clock before I got in. And the first thing I done was turn on the news, and I seen where the El Paso shooting took place with 20 dead and I don't know what, 26 or 27 injured or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, God, this is horrible. And I almost got sick because I got really emotional. I started crying. I just, it's so bad. And then whenever you wake up this morning, you add insult to misery to where now you go from 20 dead, now from 29 dead, because there was another mass shooting on the other side of the nation, over in Dayton. I've been to Dayton, Ohio. Dayton, Ohio, I didn't spend a whole lot of time in Dayton, but Dayton, Ohio has its problems pertaining to a drug culture community, the same way as Cincinnati, Ohio. Cincinnati, Ohio has its problems. It's an older town right off the corridor of Lewis and Clark off the Ohio River there. I've also been up into other parts of Ohio that I actually, Columbus, Ohio, that I actually found to be very influential. I liked it up there in Columbus. I was actually in a big parade up there whenever I had my car dressed up going up to Washington, D.C. in 1991, whenever I was stopped by 2 Ohio police departments that gave me a warning and told me that if I had any sense, I would turn my vehicle around and go back to Tennessee. But instead, I stopped in Wheeling, West Virginia. That's whenever Secret Service basically framed me or entrapped me and said that I had threatened President Bush's life, in which I never did. And I think a lot of people that know my story can understand what actually happened there. But to get back to the initial problem, this is biblical Bible prophecy coming true towards Jesus, or the Bible saying that perilous times would come in the last days. Christ said to pray for 2 things whenever you shall see these things. Pray, number 1, that you're worthy to escape these things that are going to befallen upon to the earth. Or pray, Jesus said, that you can endure these things that are going to befallen upon to the earth, indicating that these things will in fact fall upon to the earth in the last days, until we see a mighty movement or a revival that will engineer into a revolution. I have not seen that yet. The people around here didn't want to embrace the Windmill Ministries missions pertaining to seeing a great revival towards peace and utopia and prosperity fall upon to society. So now we're wreaking that, in which what these people around here, not so much of what they did do, but what they did not do towards not supporting that in which what they should have supported. It's really sad, because a lot of people think that they're just going to be judged off of that in which what they have done. And the thing about it is, we're going to be judged just as much off of what that we have done, in the aspect towards what that we didn't do that we know that we should have done. That's the part that the people around here don't understand. Once more, this is a horrible, horrible situation. I pray for the victims. I pray for those who have been touched by such of a tragedy such as this. Father God, we ask, O Lord, that you continue to keep your guiding hand upon to our lives, and that we will turn from our sinful and wicked ways to understand these signs that are coming upon to us in one form or another. We pray, Lord, for the victims and those that are suffering and have went through such horror just within the past 24, 30 hours. We just pray, God, for this nation, pray, God, for the healing of this nation, and pray, God, for the healing of all nations throughout this planet. In Jesus' name, amen. Shalom to my viewers.